Justin, are you in your kimono?
Yes, I am. I got pinged yesterday, and the result is, of course, I am now shut away and can't do my business either. So is this affecting the economy? Yes, it is. Of course it is.
Well, some people are saying that the crisis is going to strangle our recovery, and it's going to really have a bad effect on our ability as a nation to bounce back economically from all of the restrictions and all of the issues that we've seen over the last 18 months. Is there some truth in that?
Oh, yes, there's a great deal of truth in that, because the economy requires a level of confidence. And if people don't have confidence, they don't spend, they don't go out, they don't do things. And what this is doing at the moment is actually just eroding all that confidence. So every day that goes by that you have this ping mania going on, it's just yet another element of just eroding to it. We were getting back some confidence again. We were beginning to manage our way through it. Even though we were still having to deal with high numbers of people with the COVID, actually the economy was doing relatively well, and there were signs of actually decent recovery. However, we've now put ourselves in a position because everybody being pinged like this, it is actually just putting the brakes, not just the brakes, but all the brakes on at the same time. And you're going to actually be in danger of almost stopping the economy. And that is really, really stupid. And that's just not a matter of saying it's actually going to help the COVID at all. It's just we're just damaging ourselves in the process.
But what would you say to those people saying, well, look, it's this or nothing. Without this ping, without these rules about isolation, we would be back in another lockdown, which would be equally, if not worse, when it comes to the damage for the economy. What would you say to those people?
The key issue is actually making sure everybody gets jabbed, and as quickly as possible, and across all the ages. We knew full well that now it was entering, obviously, the younger generations, and we knew that more of them were going to get hurt with it, and a proportion of them will end up going to hospital, and very sadly, some will die. What that means is you need to increase the jabbing to those generations as quickly as possible. We somehow got to the extent of saying all we need to do is jab the oldies, and then some a bit below that, and that'll be fine, and we can just carry on. It's not fine. Carry on the process of doing it. You're seeing exactly the same.
But the thing is, we've got over 80% of people though have had their first jab. I think it's going up every single day. I mean, and the issue with that though, Justin, is that then it sort of spills over into the government trying to bring in measures that some see as draconian in order to make people get jabbed. That's why we've got these potential vaccine passports coming in. So isn't it quite a fine balance for the government?
It is. It's very difficult indeed, because obviously none of us want to live in a sort of quasi-fascist state where we actually have to obey all these rules. But on the other hand, if you want to be part of society and have a society that's functioning, you have to obey the rules. In a funny sort of way.
But when did jabs become rules, though, Justin? I'm pro-vaccine, don't get me wrong, but I'm not pro a government saying, sorry, we can't have economic prosperity if you haven't had this jab. You can't have access to the kinds of things and services and rights of other people without that jab. Don't you think we're going down a very dangerous road by doing that? I mean, if you're going to ask me between that or economic misery, I'd choose economic misery.
I think there's a balance between the two here, because if you think about the other vaccines that we've had over the years that we've now come to accept as ones which are almost essential to have. Now, who would actually not be having polio and things like that? It's not seen as being compulsory to have, but it's just being accepted to have. And this is how we have to try and put this across. It's actually not sort of something, you must do this because Big Brother tells you to, because I'll be the first one to put a couple of fingers up to that. But actually realizing it's good for society and the rest of us, and also the economy, if we actually do go along with it. Or put it the other way around, what's the downside of actually going along with it? It's not as though you're going to be taking huge risks. It's actually probably more a point of actually being antisocial. So it's a matter of how it's put across. We mustn't lose our individual rights, but equally with our rights go our obligations, and our obligations to our fellow members of society to make sure they're going to be safe and well as well.
But isn't it the reality now that we've just got to live with this somehow? And pinging right, left and centre is almost as damaging as locking down right, left and centre. And we have to think of a way to try and live with this that we can continue our lives, don't we?
There is an horrific side of this, which is I feel for politicians having to say it, there comes a stage when you have to say, I'm sorry, but there is an acceptable level of operations here, which means an acceptable level of death. And no one wants to see any deaths at all, but you're going to see some. On the other hand, you then say, well, how many people are dying of cancer every day? Do they not have the rights to be able to look after us? And of course they do. So we have to live with this. There is going to be a level of hurt and death and horror going with that. But on the other hand, how do you actually manage your way through to that? And that is by making sure the vaccine gets put through. Put it through to those people who are now at most risk, the youngest ones, and make sure the schools are operating. And then we have some chance of actually making sure the economy can function at a level. You're absolutely right. If we carry on with this pandemic, we will effectively stop the economy, and that doesn't help anybody at all. But the problem is that,
again, I would see some logic with what you were saying, but one of the main arguments that is being used about the ping and why it's also needed is because of the fact that some people can't get jabbed or the jab isn't effective on them. So even if we have the scenario where, okay, I want people to want to take the jab, I don't want them to be forced to, but I want them to want to. And let's say, ideal scenario, lots of people take it, and we end up nearly at capacity of people being jabbed.
Yeah.
My fear is they're still going to say, well, sorry, it doesn't stop the virus spreading. It won't stop it getting to those vulnerable people who can't be jabbed or it doesn't work on. So I'm not even sure that the solution you're offering would stop this pingdemic.
Well, what stops the pingdemic is actually adjusting the app itself. So actually, it just hasn't had such sort of a narrow regime, such a broad regime. You actually narrow it down to a smaller group. Because at the moment, it's just causing more difficulties. But the overall problem, though, with this, remember, is that what's going to happen is we are going to see more variations of this. We're going to see other elements of the COVID over the next few months. And therefore, the longer we leave it with people still suffering from it, the more chance we've got of seeing these variations coming through. So it's a dreadful issue to try and manage. But unfortunately, we're going to have to learn to live with it. And that means learning to live with a number of cases coming through. What we have to try and do is actually manage as much as possible to minimize those people who are still exposed. But we can't afford to have the economy stop, because otherwise, if we don't have the money to do so, then Britain's got a much, much bigger problem to manage.
So what other mitigating measures do you think that Rishi Sunak could be putting in to stop the economy being dragged down by people pinging? I mean, you've made your views clear on us getting people vaccinated. I agree with the principle. I don't agree with the sort of methods the government are trying to go about doing that. But what about other methods to try and get the economy stimulated and not overly affected by this? Should there be more exemptions, for instance?
Well, one of the key things we're doing is look at the areas we're good at. Britain over the past 20 years has been incredibly good at setting up new businesses, and many of them high-tech businesses. I know we focus a lot on service and leisure economy, which obviously is very important. But actually, you look at the high-tech areas and the high-tech hubs around the country. You know, those awful phrases they have of Silicon Roundabout, Silicon Fen, Glen Beach, Silicon Gorge, which is Bristol. And the point is this: you're seeing us actually very good at actually developing those sort of businesses, high-tech businesses, which breed and create those sort of hubs. What we're not very good at is actually growing those businesses from small starts into little seedlings to growing businesses. We find that the Americans and Continentals come along and buy them up because they're very good businesses, and we lose them. What we should be doing is greater, not government money, greater tax incentive. As we've all got the enterprise investment scheme, we can broaden that out to encourage more investment into these businesses. That encourages employment, that encourages more investment, that encourages more inward investment apart from anything else, and grows the economy irrespective of what COVID is doing.
All right. I'm not sure how effective that's going to be if all of us are at home doing that, but then I suppose, maybe those are the sorts of businesses that you can run from home. Really good to talk to you. Thank you, Justin Urquhart Stewart.